Thank you for tuning in to Planting Seeds, Philanthropy in Saskatchewan, a podcast where we aim to connect you to the community impact that is empowered by donors and charities across the prairies. I'm your host, Victor Roman, from the South Saskatchewan Community Foundation. I hope you enjoyed the listen. We have a very special guest with us today. We are joined by Dr. Tom Deans, the New York Times top 10 author of Every Family's Business. With more than 1 million copies sold, it remains the best-selling family business book of all time. He's also the author of the book Willing Wisdom. Dr. Deans has delivered more than 1,000 keynote speeches in 26 countries. If you've seen Dr. Deans on BNN or CNBC, you'll know that he delivers a fast-paced, entertaining, and contrarian message that you won't want to miss. So thanks for joining me today, Tom.
Well, great to be here. I'm really excited about our conversation.
Absolutely. I'm glad you could make the time. I know you've got a busy schedule, so it's great that you were able to. Is there any other information you want to mention about yourself or what you do other than kind of what came in your bio there?
Yeah, I think the thing for listeners to really understand is that I am a thought leader, really in the purest sense of the word. I'm a full-time speaker and author, so I really deal in the world of ideas, and much of my content and ideas on the subject of generational wealth transition, whether that's a business or family wealth that's moving either to family or to community, is really gleaned from extensive travel, extensive conversations with literally tens of thousands of readers of my books. So it's really there's a real reciprocity in the work that I do. I write, I give thought-provoking speeches, and then I learn. I get feedback, and I shape and soften, in some cases harden, some of my views around philanthropy. There's some fascinating developments and trends that are starting to appear.
Well, that's fantastic. And obviously you have a vast amount of experience when it comes to family business. I understand you were a family business owner yourself when you wrote your book. Is that correct?
I was, yes. I was the CEO of a large family business, a business that my father started. I ran that business for 8 years as CEO, and then sold that business on February 8th, 2007. And it occurred to me that is something that actually prior generations had done. So my grandfather had a family business, which was sold, and grandfather as well. And so I reflected on that, the fact that we had actually never transitioned our businesses to our kids. We'd actually, we had involved them in their operations, but had never given a business to our children for free. And I thought, that is so peculiar, so interesting, and certainly so out of step with some of the vast majority of stories that I'd collected from other family business or business families. There was this kind of obsession with giving the business to the children and hoping that it worked out. And of course, the data was suggesting that, in fact, that wasn't going particularly well. So I wrote Every Family's Business from a very different perspective. One could argue that, anyone who writes a decent book is trying to convince themselves of an idea, not their readers. And so I think I wrote Every Family's Business to kind of switch that narrative, flip it upside down and say, maybe we measure the success of a family business, not in generations, but in terms of how that family works on a transition that's right for both generations. And I wrote that book, Every Family's Business, and it literally took off. I think there were actually millions of business owners who are waiting to hear my message, that there has always been a reluctance to leave businesses to the next generation, and a reluctance by the next generation to actually continue their parents' work. In many cases, it's not their passion, it's not their dream, it's not their aspiration, or even their talents. Like, to imagine that the next generation always will possess the same skill set and passion as their parents for a particular business or industry is proving to be not the case. So,
absolutely.
So that's really the genesis of Every Family's Business, a very, very thought-provoking book that really took off, and that has sold over 1.5 million copies. It's actually become the best-selling family business book of all time.
It's one thing that I think of too is, especially if you're kind of if you're the first generation of a business, that's really personal. It would be really difficult, I think, both mentally and just it's such a challenging concept of, I built this, I know it inside and out. How do I hand it over to somebody? So that whole succession planning process, I know just from others, can be very, very daunting. And I believe one of the things I heard you say in something else I heard you in was that a family business generally lasts about 3 generations maximum. Is that correct?
Actually, only 30% of family businesses survive
Mm.
to the second generation.
Wow.
So in fact, and then only 10% of that 30% make it to the third. So stated differently, um, founders of businesses have a 3% chance of their grandchildren owning and operating their business. That really means there's a tremendous amount of wealth destruction
Hmm.
across generations, and that shame and disappointment is often being worn by the recipient generation of those businesses. In many cases, they're
Yeah.
reluctant owners. They didn't want it, they didn't ask for it, but because out of a sense of duty and obligation, they're finding themselves running these businesses, and then of course they don't last, and then they it really is very. There's a lot of suffering in family businesses, and that I suppose
Yeah.
that's really what drives me to give these public lectures and podcasts and share my message all around the world. Everything I talk about applies to billionaires and to the entrepreneur with one employee or no
Hmm.
employees, maybe running a corner store. They're the same issues, just more zeros.
So I guess one question that kind of comes up as you're saying this is, when you think about a business, I think the business might be seen by the business owners. This is the legacy I'm passing down. But as you mentioned, it's not really a legacy because it's not going to last as long as they might think it is. Obviously, with we're a community foundation, and we're in the idea of people kind of creating a legacy through endowed giving that will last forever. So the philanthropy side of the legacy, but philanthropy and business wise and family wise, what would you see as what is the legacy that people should be looking to give when they are actually looking at their wealth and their family business?
Yeah, you've really keyed and targeted really the central part of my message, and it's a hard message to deliver to business owners. I mean, having been a business owner, I am a business owner now. I mean, I can tell you that if someone comes along and says, "Hey, Tom, the business you're building right now, that's not your legacy," it kind of feels like a criticism. It kind of feels like
Hmm.
someone's, making passing judgment about, my business, or how profitable it is, or how well managed it is. And so it's a hard message to tell a business owner that, in fact, if you look at the data, this is not my personal view, it's the data. Businesses typically don't last. What we
Hmm.
find in the literature is that someone will pick one data point. They'll pick one business that has last 3 or 4 or 5 generations, and they'll hold that up as the shining example of a successful family. Well, when in case it's a complete outlier. Of the 100 largest firms in America in the year 1900, only 16 were still in business in the year
Hmm.
2000. That's 4 generations. Like, I don't like those odds. I'd rather go to Vegas where the drinks are free. I mean, you're
Yeah.
4 generations. Businesses, the products, the services that they offer are constantly evolving and changing. Consumer demand changes, technology changes. Can you imagine if you're a manufacturer of buggy whips, in 1910, and you're thinking life is, it's pretty good. We've been making buggy
Yeah.
whips for 150, 200 years. Like, there's always going to be horses and buggies. And then this thing called a car comes along, and but there's a family business owner transitioning their buggy whip manufacturing business to their kids, saying, this is my legacy.
Yeah.
So I'm really trying to remind business owners that, in fact, businesses don't last. And so if the business is not the legacy, it does beg, and you've asked the question, what is? And I firmly believe that, in fact, it is the family. It's family relationships. Their
Hmm.
relationships with themselves, their relationships to their communities, to their institutions that matter in their lives, whether it's their churches, their universities, their healthcare, their whatever it is. But we all have connections in our community, and those we find are enduring. Those are the things that last in perpetuity.
Hmm.
The kind of purposeful work that can be funded from the sale of a business is really the kinds of things that hold themselves up to be really profound and enduring legacies.
Hmm. So there's two words that stuck out there to me is family and community, which when one of the things we're always talking about here is wills and the role of a community foundation or charities and charitable giving within wills. So when you're looking at from the family business perspective, or even an individual writing a will, um, how do you explain to people that you can give to your family, but it's also important to give to your community? And what does that mean when you're giving to your community as well as to your family?
Yeah, again, another very good question, and a little bit complex. So let me break that down. I
Hmm.
truly believe that, stepping back, we tend to view estate planning, which is, of course, we view estate planning as really having a will. It answers the
Hmm.
question, who is going to get my stuff when I'm no longer here? Uh, and when people frame it that way, it should be no surprise that 12.5 million Canadians don't have a will. When you
Yeah.
think about it in those terms, it's like, well, how much fun is that? Trying to figure out which one of my surviving family members is going to get for free everything that I work for. So it is a subject that a lot of Canadians really procrastinate, they delay. And I suppose that what I'm trying to do is reframe what estate planning is, and to show it and hold it up as really not just about dying and death. It's actually about creating an opportunity to engage with your family and your community about your life's work and how it can be directed in a way where it feels enduring, and
Hmm.
and that it shouldn't necessarily just be a kind of a lonely exercise where people would sit maybe in their living room and contemplate and write their will. In their, it's called a holographic will. They write it themselves, and it feels like this very dark, somber moment. What I'm trying to say is, why don't we reflip? Why don't we recast what estate plans are, and view them as a collaborative undertaking, where we would sit
Hmm.
down with our family, with our charities of choice, and explore together while we're alive what those people and organizations would do with our wealth. I mean, we work hard for our money, and to imagine that we are just going to, in the privacy of our own home, in solitude, make a decision and then keep that decision secret until the moment we die, and then not get to enjoy watching what I describe in my book as our emissaries, the people that we
Hmm.
would place our hope and trust to take our hard-earned wealth and deploy it in a way that pays homage and respect to that work and that effort. And so, really, what I'm trying to do is say that in my book, Willing Wisdom, that in fact, the fear of death actually recedes. It
Hmm.
actually, we can solve that problem by engaging in conversations with our family about our wealth. It's very counterintuitive. But when we do that and we engage the next generation, we prepare heirs. We prepare heirs and charities to have very clear instructions and ideas about what we would hope they would do with our wealth. These are amazing gifts. These are the best gifts. And I can tell you that when I was the chairman of our local hospital foundation, it was very common to receive six-figure gifts from people we had never met. And all we were left with was questions about how we should honor those gifts. We had no idea what to do
Yeah.
with it. So we ended up, and then this would be the sad part. We would reach out to the surviving family members and say, "Do you have any information about maybe what your mother or father wanted us to do with that money?" And they would be full of, shrugs and no answers. And I'm
Hmm.
thinking, this is crazy. What a lost opportunity to have, you know, where that person could have connected their giving decision with their family and maybe given that family a role. Um, and I just think, this is a real opportunity. And listen, over the course of the recording of this podcast, about $4 million will be inherited in Canada. About $205 million every single day is inherited. It is a
Oh, wow.
tsunami of money that is transitioning across the generations, and most of it is transitioning really chaotically, being left to people with no context, no direction, no real instructions on how those gifts could honor someone's life. And I just think we can do better, and I know we can do better. And when I see families attempt to do better and to push through that fear of planning and estate planning and all that it feels like it is, they pop out the other end of that process, you know, and they feel really excited.
Hmm. And It is a hard process to do, I think, for many people. Again, like you say, there's the fear around death. So to reframe it in a way that you're not thinking about death, but you're actually focusing on kind of the life around you and the life that's going to be succeeding you, um, hopefully helps turn that into more of a positive message. And the one thing that really occurred to me with what you said is, you mentioned that donor that gives, six figures to any organization, but if there isn't that context, if that purpose isn't clear to the organization, to the family, to the people surrounding it, then that legacy is almost a little bit lost. And not to say that it needs to be, in my case, it's like, I'm Victor Roman, I'm giving this to you and I want my name on it. Like, no, like they probably just wanted to be humble about it. But if nobody knows what your what your plans are, then then what you intended doesn't actually come through either. So there does have to be a way that, as you mentioned, having those conversations during life and exploring what's important and honing in on your passions or the things in community that have moved you throughout your life can really help not only solidify to make sure that your planned giving goes the way you intended it to, but also to create that sense of culture within your own family that might create a passion in your kids or in your spouse that they might not have had other than having those intimate personal conversations with yourself.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I think what I think is interesting when we approach philanthropy and the transition of family wealth in that collaborative way is that we often learn something, right? I think we tend to frame it now as I have the money, I'm getting old, I will make the decisions on my own, and I think that is the lost opportunity. I think I think when people reach out and say, why don't we talk to, a charity? Let me see what the needs are in the community. Let's do some research as a family together and really, really invest, our energy and our creativity in, the problems that are besieging our community. And let's work on this together. I mean, can you see all of a sudden how a check writing exercise or an exercise of inserting a charity's name in a will moves from this kind of, I don't know, I mean, very well intentioned, but it lacks that
Mm-hmm.
the real benefit flowing to the donor, that person who really digs in. And of course, one of the really often misunderstood benefits of doing what I just described is we teach the next generation. And I've watched this, particularly in family meetings where matriarchs and patriarchs, people certainly in their 60s and 70s and 80s, as they're getting older, and they've assumed they've acquired more capital than they can spend or even want to spend. So there's no doubt there's going to be surplus capital, and they're sitting down with trusted advisors present, and they're really bringing that rigor, that intellectual rigor, to a particular philanthropic problem. And when the next generation really sees how this works and how careful and even parsimonious that next generation is being with their charitable dollar, they are teaching their children something incredibly profound. They're using philanthropy to engage the next generation and teach them that whether that family is talking about taking a dollar out and investing it, or taking a dollar out of their holding company to purchase something, or taking a dollar out of a holding company to make a gift while they're still alive to, say, a community foundation, they're they treat each one of those with the same kind of rigor, the same kind of logic and creativity, and that is really powerful. They're teaching the next generation that a dollar is a dollar is a dollar.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so you compare that and contrast that with the family that just draws up a will, picks a charity,
Yeah.
and because they got a tax problem,
Yeah.
right? Like the real lost opportunity there is how the next generation can be engaged.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I mean, I have met so many affluent, I would say, and they may even not even describe themselves as affluent, but certainly people whose parents had surplus capital left, sizable gifts to charities. And the next generation were like totally comfortable with that. because there was ample wealth that was transitioned to them. But
Hmm.
the sense of loss, the sense of being disengaged or disconnected from why their parents left money to a particular cause, what
Yeah.
they would have, what they would give to have their parents back for one day to have those conversations. Many, many, many next gens want to serve the memories of their parents or grandparents, and they
Yeah.
don't know how. They're ill equipped because they didn't have those repetitive family conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. That's that's one thing that at SSCF, South Saskatchewan Community Foundation, where we are is, and I'm fairly new to the organization too. I've only been here for just over 2 years, so this is all still fairly new to me. But it's really nice to see when you look at the endowed funds, and there's a lot of family funds or family businesses too that are now on to kind of that. The person has passed, and it's family members that are overseeing it as fund holders. Is that there is that fund purpose, it is there, and it is in most cases very clear what the intentions were, and um it's defined, so it's going to happen in perpetuity, and the family has that context, they have that focus, and they're able to drive it forward. And yeah, it is so important that you have that purpose, otherwise you have no idea if that's going to be going, if your impact is going to be going the way you wanted it to, and also for how long you intended it to. um one other thing. So we're a member of the national campaign Willpower. I'm not sure if you're
I
familiar with
am.
that one, but
Yes.
one statistic we hear from that is that only 5% of Canadians currently leave a charity in their will. So I know you mentioned that there's situations where the family members often are totally fine with the fact that they didn't get all the money and that it was going back to community. And what are some ways for people that are maybe not aware of the idea that they should give to a charity in their will, or maybe are hesitant to, like, what are the things you would tell them to make them feel more comfortable with the idea of, like, hey, you can support your family, but you can also support your community in these ways? It doesn't have to be one or the other.
Yeah, I think, and I kind of touched on it, but I would be more assertive around this point, and that is that making living gifts, right, as a kind of a dress rehearsal for the really the big
Hmm.
transition, like, and engaging the next generation, like saying there's lots of, what is there, 85,000 registered charities in Canada. I mean, there's no shortage of options, but
Yeah.
I think there are better choices that families can make than others, especially when they dig in and have these really thoughtful, purposeful conversations to find out, what gaps exist in the community. Is it relief of poverty? Is it a religious cause? Is it a healthcare cause? Medical research? Like, there's something that is more important to one family than another, and I think um, by gathering family members to have these conversations, to make living gifts, to assess. And I love that word that you used. You used the word impact. I don't know if you know it, but you used, I mean,
Hmm.
that's what our family does. We are really assessing and looking for charities that are, this is going to sound odd, but we're business owner families. So we're looking for impact. We're looking for risk taking.
Yeah.
We're actually okay with a little bit of failure. We don't mind a charity going out on a limb and trying something new for the first time, and as opposed to doing the same old. Like, we want to see that kind of entrepreneurial spirit in the charities that we support, because in many cases, the areas that we're supporting require new solutions,
Yeah.
right? So that's going to catch our attention. So when we're making living gifts, relatively small amounts compared to what we could leave in our estates, those living gifts are very much informing our bigger decisions.
Regarding oh, I had a thought there, and I'm just trying to bring it back right now. Regarding, I guess, choosing a charity, or not even just choosing one charity, but choosing multiple causes. So that's another thing I could potentially see being a bit daunting. Is, let's say I care about youth, and I care about animals, and I care about the environment. And then if the family's kind of if they're left with all of that, how what's a good way that you can really process that and make that something that's easy to manage rather than feeling maybe a bit overwhelmed with like, well, how do we go in so many different directions
Well, certainly. I
when it
mean,
would
there's
be
only
easier to go one.
one kind of charity that I mentioned in my book, Willing Wisdom, and that is community foundations. It's no surprise that I'm on this podcast. I mean, I really truly believe in
Hmm.
the community foundation movement, and it is a movement. In fact, I spoke in Cleveland to the very first community foundation established. I mean,
Oh wow.
it's such an interesting model because it really, for the person who, just practically speaking, maybe lacks mobility. I mean, they can't get around the community and sit and interview, five or six or seven charities. You mentioned, a couple, animal welfare. I mean, relief of poverty for children, educational based charities. Like you could go on and on. I mean, people just
Yeah.
simply lack the resources or the time to go out and do that due diligence. So the community foundation movement really does that work, that legwork, and makes it easy, and makes the administration easy for donors to have major impact. I mean, they really understand the lay of the land in a particular community, and they know how
Yeah.
those community needs are evolving. I mean, it's very common. One of the knocks on charity as an institutional or systematic approach, say to relief of poverty, is that particular causes get very popularized, and then they
Yeah.
attract a huge amount of wealth. And sometimes that wealth comes in not only during the period of great need, but continues to come on. And then there's a shift. There's a shift. Some major external factor comes into place, and that need now moves over here, right?
Yeah.
So often the dollars aren't matching the need. And I think community foundations have been proven to do incredibly effectively is to be nimble, to have that ability to pivot and support emerging or burgeoning needs in communities that where maybe donors haven't caught up just because they lack the resources to do the research.
Yeah. And having that one spot you have to go to for everything, you don't have to worry about reaching out to three different organizations, or even within that, if you have three different causes, you could be impacting 20 organizations, and you only have to worry about going through one. I think that's
Yeah.
a big part of it too. Um, Thanks a lot. I'm not gonna lie, that was the answer I was hoping you were going to get. I wasn't totally sure though. I was curious, because there are a lot of people that people don't just care about one cause. There's a lot of things that touch people, and it is really important for them to know um, that there are ways to easily make that impact across the board without it being intimidating. I think it's about time for us to wrap up here. We're at our time. I really appreciate everything you said. I think you said a lot in this half an hour span, and there's a lot that our listeners are going to be probably frantically writing down with a pen to make sure they can go back and reference. So I appreciate it. Before you leave today, though, is there anything else you want to say? Is there anything you want to plug? Anything new going on in your world?
Just the one point that I would just double back on, Victor, and that is, I mean, there is a sense that philanthropy is only something that's practiced by the ultra wealthy. You know,
Hmm.
even the word estate planning, I think some people think they have to have an estate, like a big giant
Yeah.
house with big gates, big pillars out front, big swinging gates. If you don't have that, you don't have an estate. Listen, estate planning, some of the most amazing gifts have been modest gifts, but they're inspired gifts, and they inspire other people to match gifts. Like there's no end to the creativity that people can put into their both their living gifts and their plan gifts, the gifts that they put in their wills. And I think
Hmm.
I think families are starting to discover this. We are living in the most affluent time in this country.
Hmm.
As I said, 205 million will be inherited today. A record amount of money is being inherited. So there's lots of people who are like, I actually don't need the money from my parents. I've got enough of my own. Believe it or not, it's true. There are some people who
Yeah.
just like, but how could we honor our parents' lives? What could we support that feels right? Um, there's just a lot of people who, they want to really acknowledge the people who had a profound impact in their lives. And that's usually the people who are closest to us, our parents, our brothers, our sisters, our grandparents, aunts and uncles. And I think families that are starting to use family meetings to sit around on a regular basis and discuss these types of issues uh, are actually more commonplace than people realize. It's just that we're not reading about it. I mean, who wants to read about a high-functioning family that meets and
Yeah.
talks about philanthropy and then goes and has a dinner and celebrates their good fortune, right? What do we read about? We read about families fighting.
Yeah.
We read, and we're left to believe that that's all that there is, right? That's the trajectory of families. The reality is, whether you're modest wealth or high net worth wealth, very, very wealthy, doesn't matter. We're all capable of using our wealth to deepen family relationships and ties to our community. And I think certainly the Community Foundation movement across the country is doing a remarkable job of just that.
Thanks. I really appreciate that piece of advice. I think that is a really important part that, again, can often look like a barrier into the door, and it shouldn't be. So I really appreciate the fact that you emphasize that, and I can't think of a better note to end on than that. So with that, I'll let you get on with your day, and it was really nice chatting with you, and I'm really glad that we were able to do this.
Victor, it was my pleasure.
Thank you for listening today. If you'd like to learn more, visit South Saskatchewan Community Foundation at sscf.ca or find us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Just search South Saskatchewan Community Foundation. And of course, make sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you're tuning in from.